What are you even saying? You spent how much on those renovations? My voice trembled as I looked across the dining table at my father, Paul. Leaning back in his chair, he responded with ease, $25,000. You wouldn't believe the transformation. Honestly, Liv, you should be proud of what you've helped accomplish. His words hit me like a punch. I froze, my hands gripping the edge of the table tightly. Proud? He spoke as though I had willingly offered to bankroll this project. That's my credit card you used, Dad. You took it without asking. That's theft, I said firmly. Paul remained unfazed, offering a half-hearted shrug and keeping that same smug look on his face. Theft is a pretty harsh word, Liv. We're family. It's not like I used a stranger's card. Plus, you've got a solid job. You'll make that money back before you know it. His nonchalant tone left me momentarily stunned. Paul had always prioritized himself, but this was a new low. My name is Olivia, and I've spent years carving out a stable career. As a financial analyst, I've always been disciplined with money. That $25,000 wasn't pocket change. It represented years of careful saving, passing on vacations, and living below my means to build a future I could count on. Paul had always been the opposite of responsible. He loved to make grand plans, talk endlessly about big ideas, and spend freely, never with his own money. Growing up, I quickly learned he could rationalize anything. He'd borrow things and conveniently forget to return them, ignore unpaid bills, and turn every boundary into a joke. Come on, it's just family, he would often say. But this time, I couldn't laugh it off. Do you understand what that money meant to me? I asked, my voice breaking with anger. Do you even care that you took it from your own daughter? He rolled his eyes, as if I was making a mountain out of a molehill. Stop being so overdramatic. It's just money. I had some repairs to take care of, and you were in a position to help out. I snapped back. You didn't ask. You just used my credit card without saying anything. That's not helping, that's stealing. He shrugged again and casually finished the last of his wine. What's done is done. No use crying over spilled milk. My stomach twisted as I stared at him, unable to process his complete indifference. For years, he had managed to get away with his behavior, charming his way out of any consequences. But this time was different. This time, he had crossed a line I could not ignore. That night, sleep wouldn't come. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, with his dismissive words looping through my mind. You'll make it back in no time. How could he be so unconcerned after draining away years of savings? Eventually, I gave up on sleep, got out of bed, and opened my laptop. I logged into my credit card account, each transaction making my heart sink deeper. $7,500 at a hardware store, $12,000 for roof repairs, $5,500 on landscaping. Each expense was extravagant, unnecessary, and undeniably for his own benefit. I clicked into the transaction details, searching for anything that might give me a stronger case. My pulse quickened as I noticed the shipping addresses. Every item had been sent directly to Paul's house. Finally, I had something concrete, evidence that couldn't be explained away. The next morning, I contacted the bank to report the fraudulent activity. The representative listened carefully as I detailed everything, from the unauthorized card use to the breakdown of the charges. Do you know who made the purchases? She asked. Yes, I replied, my voice steady. It was my father. There was a pause. In that case, we'll escalate this to our fraud investigation team. They may request further details from you. Depending on the findings, law enforcement might also get involved. Law enforcement. The phrase knocked the wind out of me. This wasn't how I wanted it to unfold, but I couldn't see any other way. Paul had backed me into a corner. If he assumed our relationship meant I'd let this go, he was about to learn just how wrong he was. Later that day, I confided in my closest friend, Maya. She sat quietly as I poured everything out, her expression growing darker with each passing minute. That's beyond selfish, Liv, she said firmly. You've got to hold him accountable. He can't keep treating you like this. I know, I murmured, running a hand through my hair. But he's still my dad. It feels so tangled. Messy or not, this goes deeper than money, Maya said. It's about self-respect, and he clearly has none for you. Her words struck a chord. She was absolutely right. This wasn't just about the stolen funds. It was about setting clear limits, something I should have done long ago. The following morning, I sat at my kitchen table, the fraud report from the bank in front of me. Paul had ignored boundaries before, but this was on a whole different level. I couldn't stop thinking about the smug look he wore that night over dinner, the way he brushed me off as if I were overreacting. I had to confront him, though I wasn't sure what I expected. Maybe I had hoped for an apology, at the very least, a glimpse of regret. But instead, I walked into a performance of denial and deflection. When I pulled up to Paul's house, he was proudly admiring his freshly renovated yard. A wide smile stretched across his face. "Looks great, doesn't it?" he said cheerfully. "All thanks to you." His words made my stomach churn. I couldn't hold back. "Thanks to me," I snapped. "You mean thanks to the $25,000 you took without asking?" Paul let out a deep sigh, shaking his head as if I were being unreasonable. "Liv, we've talked about this. It's family money. I didn't steal anything, I just borrowed it. Honestly, this house needed a lot of fixing up, and now it's finally coming together. You should be happy about that." I stared at him, taken aback by how bold he was being. "Paul, borrowing something requires asking first. You never did. You just took it. That's not borrowing." He folded his arms tightly, his voice growing more defensive. "You're still young. You've got time to earn that money back. Why are you making this into such a huge issue? I'm your father. I've sacrificed a lot for you. Can't you just let this go?" The disbelief in me rose like a wave. My voice trembled with fury. "Sacrificed? What sacrifices are you even talking about? You've been draining me dry since I can remember. This is just the first time you've been caught red-handed." His expression changed, darkening quickly. "Watch your tone," he warned. "You're acting ungrateful. I didn't have to take care of you. I could have left everything to your mom." That hit hard, but I refused to let him see how deeply those words cut. "Ungrateful? Really? I've been the one cleaning up after your messes for as long as I can remember. I've forgiven more than I should have. But this is the limit." For the first time, a flicker of discomfort passed over Paul's face. "What are you saying, Liv? Are you seriously going to involve people outside the family?" I met his eyes and replied without hesitation, "I already have. The bank is involved. The fraud team is reviewing everything. If you think I'll back down, then you never really understood who I am." The very next morning, I got a call from the bank's fraud division. Sitting at my kitchen table with a mug of coffee in hand, I listened closely as Mr. Bennett, the investigator, outlined the steps ahead. "We've reviewed the transactions and compared them with the documentation you sent," he said. "Since the shipping addresses line up with your father's residence, it's clear these charges were not authorized by you. We'll need a formal statement, and this will likely be escalated to your local authorities for further action." The phrase, "local authorities," made my stomach twist with anxiety. "Does that mean he could be charged?" I asked cautiously. "Yes," Mr. Bennett responded plainly. "This qualifies as theft. The amount involved makes it a serious matter. What happens next depends on law enforcement, but I recommend you prepare yourself for that outcome." I thanked him and ended the call, my fingers trembling slightly. The reality was sinking in. After all these years of Paul skating by, charming his way out of accountability, there were finally real consequences on the horizon. Without thinking, I called Maya. I paced my living room as I told her everything. "He's going to lose it when the police show up. What if this completely destroys our relationship?" She didn't sugarcoat anything. "Liv, what relationship are you even trying to save? He's walked all over you for years. Every time you let it slide, he just gets bolder. This isn't about ruining something. It's about finally standing up for yourself." Her words hit me like a wake-up call. She was right. I had spent so much time keeping the peace, trying to avoid conflict, that I hadn't noticed how much I had lost myself along the way. "I'm tired of feeling like this," I admitted, voice cracking. "Every time I defend myself, I end up feeling like I'm the villain." "You're not the bad guy here," Maya said firmly. "You're finally holding someone accountable who's never been challenged. That takes courage, Liv. Don't let him make you doubt that." Her voice stayed with me as I returned to the fraud report open on my laptop. This wasn't just about getting my money back, it was about creating boundaries that should have been in place long ago. If this investigation was the only way Paul would learn that his actions had consequences, then so be it. I picked up the phone and called Mr. Bennett again. "I'll submit the formal statement today," I told him. The aftermath arrived more quickly than I expected. That evening, just as I was about to eat dinner, my phone lit up with Paul's name. I hesitated before picking up, knowing the call wouldn't be easy. "Olivia," he began, his tone sharp. "I just got off the phone with the bank. Are you seriously going through with this? You filed a fraud report against me." "Yes, Paul," I said calmly but firmly. "I did. You took $25,000 from me. What did you expect would happen?" His voice turned angry. "I told you I didn't steal anything. It's family money. I was always planning to pay it back. But now you've turned this into something serious, something federal. Do you even realize what kind of mess this could create for me?" "You didn't just make a mistake, Paul," I said with unwavering steadiness. "You took my credit card without asking. That's theft. If you're dealing with serious consequences now, it's because of your own decisions." There was a heavy silence before he finally spoke again, his voice low and laced with menace. "You're being absurd," he said, the frustration clear in his tone. "You're blowing this way out of proportion just to make a statement. What's next? Taking me to court too?" "If that's what needs to happen," I replied without hesitation. "You've spent years disregarding my boundaries like they were optional. This isn't about proving anything to anyone. It's about finally standing up for myself." His response came out like a hiss. "Unbelievable. After everything I've done for you, this is your idea of gratitude." I let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "Really, Paul? Done for me? You mean like claiming credit for the work I put in? Or maybe borrowing money and never paying it back? Or the countless times I had to clean up after your disasters while you disappeared like it wasn't your problem?" There was nothing but silence on the other end of the line for a few moments. Then, in a tone colder than I'd ever heard from him, he said, "You're going to regret this, Olivia." Before I could respond, he hung up, leaving me trembling with a mix of fear and fury. This was exactly why I had avoided confronting Paul for so long. Every time I tried to stand firm, he twisted things until I felt like I was the one in the wrong. Later that evening, I called Maya just to let off steam. "He really said I'd regret this," I told her, my voice tight and full of tension. "Let him stew in it," she said with conviction. "He's angry because, for once, he's being held accountable. Don't let him intimidate you into backing down." Her reassurance helped, but that gnawing unease didn't fade. I wasn't going to retreat, but deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. 2 days passed before the call I had been dreading finally came. But it wasn't Paul on the other end this time. It was my mother. The moment I picked up, her voice cut through sharply, heavy with irritation. "Olivia, what are you doing? Your father just called me, completely distraught. He says you're trying to destroy his life." I took a deep breath, already steeling myself for the wave of guilt that was sure to follow. "I'm not trying to ruin anything, Mom. He took $25,000 from me. I reported the fraud to the bank. That's what you're supposed to do when someone takes your money. He's your father," she snapped, as if that alone justified everything. "And I'm his daughter," I said, trying hard to keep my tone steady. "But that didn't stop him from stealing from me, did it?" She sighed, her voice softening into weary disappointment. "You know how he is, Liv. He doesn't mean harm. He just doesn't always think things through. Couldn't you have dealt with this quietly, within the family?" I was stunned. "Quietly?" I echoed. "Mom, he spent $25,000 of my money without telling me. How exactly was I supposed to keep that quiet?" "He's your father," she said again, as though repeating it would somehow make it more reasonable. "He's under so much pressure with the house and the bills. He didn't intend to hurt you." My jaw clenched. There's always an excuse for him, isn't there? He's always under pressure or not thinking things through or just didn't mean it. But I'm the one who ends up picking up the pieces. "Olivia," she said, her voice turning into a pleading whisper. "Please, just drop it. This investigation is going to crush him. You know how he gets when he feels trapped. He's already saying you're turning the whole family against him." I shut my eyes, trying to block out the wave of guilt and frustration that surged inside. I'm not turning anyone against him, Mom. He brought this on himself, and I won't let it go. For a moment, there was only silence. Then she spoke again, her tone now much colder. Fine, but don't come crying to me when this all falls apart. You've made your choice. Just remember that. She ended the call, and I stared at my phone, the sting of her words settling over me like a weight. I felt like crying, but instead I dialed Maya. Mom thinks I'm overreacting, I said, pacing back and forth across the living room. Of course she does, Maya answered without hesitation. She's spent her whole life justifying his behavior. But this isn't about her. It's about you. And you're doing what's right. I wanted so badly to believe her, but that uneasy pit in my stomach wouldn't go away. 1 week later, the fraud case began to gain momentum. I got an update from the bank's fraud unit. All the disputed charges were now marked as unauthorized, and they had informed the police. The investigator assigned to my case, Mr. Bennett, let me know that local law enforcement would probably reach out soon to confirm my statement. The news brought a strange mix of comfort and dread. Paul had spent years acting like consequences were for other people. He always seemed to dodge accountability, leaning on charm or guilt to slide out of trouble. But this time, there was a documented trail, and it was out of his hands. That afternoon, while working at my desk, my phone buzzed with a message from Maya. How's everything going with the fraud stuff? Any progress? I quickly typed back, the bank is escalating it. Police will be involved soon. I'm nervous, but I know this is what I have to do. Her response came almost immediately. I'm proud of you. You're stronger than you think. Her words brought a flicker of comfort, just enough to remind me that I wasn't facing this alone. That night, I found myself heading to Paul's place, even though I hadn't intended to confront him again. But the more I walked, the more the frustration simmered. By the time I reached his door, my anger had fully surfaced. When he opened it, he leaned casually against the frame, wearing that irritatingly smug grin. Well, if it isn't Olivia, he said with mock amusement. Back to scold me again? I met his gaze without flinching. No, Paul. I'm here to let you know that the bank has escalated the fraud investigation. The police will be reaching out to you soon. For the first time, his grin slipped. It was brief, but I noticed. He quickly tried to recover his composure. The police? Seriously, Liv? You're really going to let it get to that point? This is out of my hands now, I replied firmly. You made your choices, and now you'll have to face the outcome. He moved back slightly, folding his arms tightly. So, you're okay with the police going after your own father? All over what? A small mix-up. My voice sharpened. It wasn't a mix-up. You took money that wasn't yours. This isn't about family or kindness, it's about taking responsibility for what you've done. His expression darkened, and he stepped in closer, a familiar challenge in his eyes. You think you're better than me now, huh? Let's not forget, Olivia, you wouldn't have that money if I hadn't raised you. A bitter laugh escaped me. Raised me? Is that what you call treating me like your personal ATM? That's over. I'm done with this. Without another word, I turned and walked away. He didn't follow, just stood there, rattled and visibly unsure for once. The next few days moved quickly. The police reached out, asking for documents, everything from the fraud complaint to detailed transaction histories. Sitting in that stark, quiet room at the station felt surreal. I passed over the files with steady hands, wondering how Paul would react when the police questioned him. Thank you for your cooperation, Miss Taylor, the officer told me after taking my statement. We'll be reaching out to Mr. Taylor soon to get his side. His side of the story. I nearly laughed at that. Paul's version would be riddled with excuses as usual. But this time, charm wouldn't bail him out. The digital evidence was clear. Those transactions pointed directly to his address, and no smooth talking could erase what was on record. Later that evening, my mom called. Her voice was sharper than before, more laced with blame. The police came to your father's house today. Do you have any idea how embarrassing that was for him? I braced myself, already expecting this tone. I told you this was going to happen. He made his decisions. I didn't force him to take my credit card. She didn't seem to listen. He says you're trying to destroy his life, Olivia. How could you do this to your own father? I'm not out to ruin him, I said with control. I'm making sure he's held accountable. He did this, not me. There was a long pause, and then she sighed, the weight of everything pressing through the phone. You've made your point, Liv. But don't you think it's gone far enough? My jaw tightened, emotions swelling in my chest. This isn't about proving anything. It's about setting limits. I've let him cross too many lines for too long. I can't do it anymore. If you can't accept that, then I don't know what else to say. She hung up without another word, leaving behind the same emptiness I felt after our last conversation. Still, despite everything, as I drove home, a strange sense of peace settled in. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I was standing up for myself. Paul had always assumed I'd let things slide, that I'd forgive no matter what. But now, he was beginning to see that actions carry consequences. And that realization brought more comfort than I'd expected. The investigation's outcome hit Paul harder than I had anticipated. The police made it clear that the case against him was strong: unauthorized purchases, the shipping address leading back to his home, and the formal complaint I had made to the bank. There was no room left for denial or charm. When I got the news that charges had been officially filed against him, my feelings were mixed. I felt relief. He was finally facing real accountability. But beneath that, there was sorrow. As much as I wanted justice, it was painful seeing my father reach this low point. That same evening, Mom called again. This time, her voice trembled, softer than before. Your father's falling apart, Liv. He's terrified. He doesn't know what to do. I paused, taking a breath to keep steady. Maybe he should have thought about that before he did what he did, I said gently. She sounded almost desperate. You're really not going to help him? He's your father. Yes, he is, I replied. But that didn't stop him from betraying me. I'm not going to pretend he's the victim in all this. I've let him spin that story for far too long. For once, she didn't push back. The silence on the other end was long, and then she spoke quietly. I just hope you're holding up okay through all of this. Her words caught me off guard. I wasn't accustomed to her checking in on me like that. Normally, it was only about smoothing things over for Paul. After a brief pause, I assured her, I'm fine. Actually, I'm better than fine. For the first time in a long while, I feel like I'm back in control of my life. After we ended the call, I sat down on the couch, letting everything sink in. This wasn't just about the $25,000 or the fraudulent charges report. It was bigger than that. It was about finally standing up for myself, setting a boundary that no one could cross again. Paul had spent years taking advantage of my kindness and trust. And for the first time, I had said, no more. As challenging as the entire process had been, a sense of closure began to settle over me. The guilt that had weighed on me for weeks slowly faded, replaced by something I hadn't felt in years: pride. When I received the final confirmation from the bank, I knew I had made the right decision. They notified me that the fraudulent charges had been reversed and the money had been returned to my account. For the first time in weeks, the tight knot in my chest loosened. I had done it. I had stood up to Paul, dealt with the aftermath in my family, and reclaimed what was mine. The old me might have let it slide, telling myself it wasn't worth the trouble. But this time I had drawn a line, and I had stood firm. Paul, however, wasn't handling things so well. According to Mom, he was trying to negotiate a plea deal to avoid jail time. He's devastated, she told me during our last conversation. But I think he finally understands how much he hurt you. I wasn't sure about that. Paul had always been good at playing the victim when it worked in his favor. But whether he truly understood or not didn't matter to me anymore. This wasn't about him, it was about me. In the weeks that followed, I began to feel a renewed clarity. My relationship with my mom was still strained, but I had come to terms with it. I wasn't going to waste my life walking on eggshells around Paul's ego or constantly making sacrifices to keep the peace. One evening, Maya came over with a bottle of wine to celebrate the end of everything. To you, she said, raising her glass, for proving that boundaries are non-negotiable. We clinked glasses, and I couldn't help but laugh. I guess I needed a $25,000 wake-up call, I joked. Better now than never, Maya replied with a smile. You're stronger than you think, Liv. Don't forget that. In the weeks that followed, I threw myself into my work with a fresh sense of determination and focus. My savings account was restored, and I had learned a lesson that would stay with me forever. Trust isn't something you give freely. It's something that has to be earned, even when it comes to family. As for Paul, I didn't know what the future held for our relationship, but for the first time, I wasn't afraid to distance myself. I wasn't afraid to say no. I had taken back control of my life, and that was worth far more than any amount of money.